I've known Sean for, wow,
A long
a
time.
long time. I was looking at a picture yesterday of us, 18, 19 years ago, 17 years ago or something like that. So Sean's done some really interesting projects in the Mac community, had a really interesting career arc.
Right.
And I know he'll give us a really interesting presentation this morning. Sean Collins, let's give him a big hand. Thank you.
So a little bit about me. As Andy said, I've been doing this for longer than I can even remember. I've forgotten so much of what I used to know. Actually, show of hands, I've just bolster my self-confidence here. Who's forgotten more than they really feel like they should have, right? Right, exactly. It's ridiculous, the amount of stuff that we get shoved into our brains. So I've worked with Apple Professional Services for a lot of years. Used to be very, very active in the Apple Consultants Network, have had every size customer I think you can imagine, right? I mean, small mom and pop stuff. Some of my most loyal customers are still people who are, like one person or two people in their living room, and they've moved from house to house, and they still run some kind of home business. And then there's things like, deploying iPads to all the students at LAUSD. The scale's kind of crazy. The biggest jobs that I've done have really been through Apple Professional Services, where I've been able to work with project managers who, like Jan Barlow, who worked at the beginning of the Schools for the Future thing for Los Angeles Unified. She taught me everything I know about project management. She's amazing. A lot of really great people I've worked with over the years, and as I was preparing this, I suffered the most insane writer's block. And so Leon's already standing in the back of the room. I'm going to embarrass him. Everybody turn around and say thank you to Leon for helping me get past the writer's block on this presentation. He's amazing. And Neil, of course, because he's always encouraging me to get out there. And Jacob Kemp, right there. I get choked up because the community to me is really important. And sometimes it's easy to forget that. And Jacob came up to me last night and he said, you know what, I'm coming to see you because this is what my organization sent me here for. This is what I need. And I was just like, oh my God, okay, I gotta get past this writer's block because Jake needs to hear this stuff. So not to overblow this, but I'm really emotional about this because it's a big deal, and it's important for me to remember what the community is here for and what I'm here for. So today, the description on this talk was really weird. Recipes, ingredients, MDM, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, which may have led to the writer's block. So Leon and I were hashing this out, and it really comes down to, if you're going to deploy MDM, you've got plenty of resources out there, and I've got some great links at the end of the presentation, which you'll obviously get, to give you technical details. But I've seen more projects fail because the project wasn't run properly, or somebody missed a step somewhere along the way. So to help you guys to deploy an MDM, the way I think of a recipe for deploying an MDM properly really has to do with preparing and executing the entire process correctly, right? So we're going to talk about the resources that you're going to need and determining your needs assessment, which is just huge because you can't go after a target you don't know where it is. Conducting that needs assessment, developing an architecture to meet that, then prototyping your architecture. Is that me? That's them. That's them, okay. That's so weird. I can't even tell if those are, oh, whatever. Hopefully that was a lot more painful in there than it was in here, because that means it's them and not us, and we can move on. Prototyping, choosing a solution, and then going through the refresh process. So let's start with resource availability. Any MDM deployment has to have, and really any significant project size, has to have sufficient resources dedicated to that project in order for it to succeed. So what does that mean? I've seen people go into the deployment of systems knowing that the thing that they have right now sucks, and they want to replace it. And that's the only thing they know going into it. And so there's one person who's like the knight in shining armor on the charging white horse, and they're like, we're going to do this, and they run right off a cliff. So the resources that you're going to need incorporate buy-in. Nicole McCall, I don't know if you're in the room, yesterday was incredible, great presentation. If you weren't in her presentation yesterday, look it up later on in the videos, because it was a great thing on buy-in. But you're going to need appropriate staffing. You need to be sure that your organization is going to have appropriate funding to get you through the end of the process. You need to plan for training. You need to have test equipment. If you're going to be doing a deployment, especially an MDM deployment, and you don't have enough spare equipment in your inventory to run appropriate testing before you go live, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Be sure you have enough time set aside. Don't go into a project thinking that you're going to be able to get through it in less time than it really is likely to take. And I want to try to make this a little bit interactive, because I realize that there's a lot of people in this audience who have probably already deployed an MDM solution and have gone through a project like this. So for the benefit of everybody in the room, I want to give everybody the opportunity to speak up about this. What other resources would you consider mission critical to be sure that you've at least thought about having them before you get started? And if we could get a microphone down here so that the audio could get on the video, that would be great. Do we have a person in the back for audio? No? Let me see if I can do that, because I probably know where that thing is. Hold on one second. Pardon me while I run into the back. Or I could just give you my mic. We could just wire you up. Hold on. Rich, do you know where it is? There's the stick. Awesome. Okay, great. Testing, test. Oh, it's live. That's wonderful. There you go.
Well, if there's a vendor involved, a good vendor.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. And a vendor could be the MDM vendor, could be a consultant with previous experience, right? Certainly don't be afraid to ask for help. That's great. Anybody else? Yeah? We need to get like a Nerf version of this I can throw at people. Thank you so much. Leon Lincoln, ladies and gentlemen.
If it's an iOS deployment, you need the proper Wi-Fi infrastructure.
Oh, very good. Very, very good. Yeah, that's almost like a, it's easy to overlook something like that, right? Because it's so obvious, you know? But you could you wouldn't want to deploy the devices in the first place, regardless of the MDM, if you didn't have a proper Wi-Fi deployment, right? Absolutely.
Do your research, find out who's deployed and failed.
Yeah, now that's fantastic too, right? Involve the community, that's great. That's really great. Okay, so let's talk about determining need, unless you've got another one. No, go ahead. I didn't see the hand, sorry.
A backup plan.
Okay, backup plan in terms of if it does fail. You can't make it work. Right, okay, so we're going to talk about how to hopefully put into your process things that you can do that can keep you from getting there in the first place. But yes, absolutely. So let's talk about determining need. Got to ask why first. Again, I've seen people go into projects just replacing something that sucked, but I've also seen people go into a project because somebody said they needed something. And that's not a good enough reason. There's got to be a problem, or usually a large set of problems that you're trying to solve. And you need to know the why of what you're doing, because that's going to lead you to those what questions, and then, of course, the how. Don't deploy a solution that's in search of a problem. That's not good. Another interesting point is that need can be driven by scale. Who here has deployed an MDM into an organization with less than 5 people? Okay, I'm really curious. If you're willing to say why did you deploy MDM into an organization with less than 5 people? And I'm not meaning to put you on the spot, but my point is, go ahead. Okay, that's great. He just said testing, Right? Who has an MDM deployed for their family? Just because that's a great way to kick the tires, right? That's less than 5 people probably. Sure, absolutely.
I'm going to go back to the employees' rapid turnover. Client was hiring and firing employees once a month. And
Wow.
it was a pain
And less
to-
than 5 employees or people?
5
Yeah.
salespeople with the iPads. And they're
Okay.
changing way often.
That's a great reason. That's a great reason. And that would, of course, go into your needs assessment as one of those things that's driving this. Again, know the why. So the point of this, however, was that there's going to be kind of a breakover point where you have enough people and enough devices that the cost and difficulty of deploying an MDM is worth it. And that's going to be different from one organization to another. So you just need to be thinking about that concept of scale and scalability and when that becomes a reason to go forward. So just keep in mind of when the jump-in point is. Because that need is a moving target, not only the scale thing, but also other needs of the organization, you're going to want to review this and come back to it. If you have done a needs assessment for a client or for your own company, and you've determined, you know what, we're not ready for it yet, don't just let that be one and done. You just need to keep going back and reanalyzing that business, reanalyzing that situation, because there will likely be a point where things grow to a point where you do need it. It's especially important for consultants. I've just been wanting to ask this question of one of the audiences all week long. Consultants, hands up. And in-house IT, hands up. Yeah, it's like 60% in-house IT, 40% consulting. So for those of you that are consultants, this is especially important because you likely have some smaller customers that are trying to grow their businesses and will grow into MDM eventually. And continuing to reassess those needs and keeping an eye on the features that are available. It may be that it comes the other way around. It may be that some feature becomes available through MDM that suddenly fits into your customer that it didn't before because it wasn't available or it didn't exist. All right, the last thing that was on that last slide was what type of organization, and that's a big part of this here. So whenever you're doing your needs assessment, there's a lot of important questions to ask. If you're a church, your needs are very different than they are if you're a retail store, right? And so you need to know the needs of the organization that you're working for. Again, very important for consultants because as you travel from one to the next, that means you have to be agile. You got to really be thinking on your feet because you may be going from one meeting with one customer who's a retail store to another that's a school, you know, an hour later, and you got to kind of be able to balance those needs in your head. What types of users are there? Are there students? Are those students adults at a college, or are those students kids in a kindergarten? And if they're under 13, are there under 13 laws that you need to be aware of? For that matter, with compliance, I mean, are you working in government? Are your workers firefighters? Are they police? Are they emergency responders? Are they doctors with HIPAA compliance requirements? There's all of this stuff. And I know that we've all been thinking about this because we've been deploying servers and data management solutions and whatever, but this also comes into effect with the MDM. So knowing your audience is really key to understanding those features. And when you're looking at your audience, I mean, that's your users, right? So you want to involve the people that are going to be affected by the MDM. Anyone, this is a fun rule, because it's sort of thinking about it from the backwards, like this comes from experience. Anybody who can complain about what you've done and can be talked to ahead of time, if you involve them at the outset in your needs assessment, they're going to be more involved and they're going to be more bought into your success. They should absolutely be involved at the earliest part of the needs assessment, at least at some level. Communicate with as many of the affected people that you'll be working with as is practical, not necessarily as is possible, in order to determine their needs. And ask managers to validate those identified needs to ensure that they're practical, because you will likely run into people who want the sky, and that's not always something that's cost effective. and or realistic. So this has got to be something where everybody in the organization buys into it, both the people at the lower levels of the organization and, of course, management and people who are spending the money. So to repeat, get buy-in from management on all of the needs that you identify, and then you're going to write a detailed needs assessment report. Now that report is, yes, it's going to be an actual report. It should be very well organized. This is going to be the documentation that you point back to as the reason why you did everything you did. So this is critically important. The report's going to be the beginning of setting the expectations for the organization, so it's important that it contain all of the needs that you intend to address. It's going to give you that metric that you can use to measure whether or not your MDM deployment was successful or if it was a failure later on. And later on, once the money's been spent and people are beginning to complain about stuff, you want to be able to go back and point to things where they said that that was what they wanted in the first place. Oh, I just went backwards or forwards? I went backwards. And metric, there we go. So once you've got your report finished, your needs assessment report, you're going to want all of your key stakeholders to literally sign off on this thing. You want signatures on paper. You want people to be held accountable for saying yes to everything that you're pushing into place in the organization. This is a great place to turn back on stuff. You don't want to get all the way through your implementation and find out that somebody really important doesn't agree with a basic need you identified. It's a giant risk for the project. Don't be afraid of making changes to the list of perceived needs at this stage. You do want to become cautious of doing that once you leave this stage. But once you've got a fully signed off needs assessment in hand, you're going to move on to developing your architecture, which is our next big step. Okay? So, I need to get a little bit of water here. You're going to translate your needs assessment report into something that you can use as a matrix to sort of manage your project, right? And this is going to be in the form of probably a simple spreadsheet. There are tools available for project management for sure. But you want to start off with something relatively simple, something where you can do column matching and you're going to map your needs to MDM capabilities that you're aware of. Okay, so what does this look like? So you're going to have one column that says, okay, I've got a need, and we'll just, as an example, to keep all the apps that the company wants employees to use prominently at the upper left of the home screen, right? So this is just basically saying, hey, we want to control what the home screen looks like, all right? So what's the feature requirement? Well, that's any MDM that implements the home screen layout payload, right, of which there's a lot, but then you can weight the products that you're looking at on something like ease of use, right? Some MDMs are going to do that with a GUI, and others are going to do that with a less easy-to-use interface. So maybe you want to provide a weighting from 1 to 10 on ease of use for how an MDM implements something. It's not always just necessarily an offer on yes or no kind of thing. So now you've identified a tangible requirement for your home screen layout payload support, and then you're going to, sorry, I'm buzzing. And now you've got a requirement that's documented and trackable. You're going to end up with a long report of these documented and trackable items that are going to give you the content you're going to need for your RFP. Again, tracking on weighting. Oh, so this is good. Have any of you done a needs analysis like this, where you've identified that there are needs that you thought you'd be able to accomplish with an MDM that you weren't able to accomplish with the MDM? Okay, I would love to know what that was.
My requirement was to update Microsoft Office on a Mac outside of business hours.
Okay.
And I was told by the vendor that their product could do that.
Mm-hmm.
I spent 3 months hitting my head against the wall and finally
Okay, all right, all right. So in your case, you know, you did your needs assessment. You knew what you needed to do, right? You went to the vendors that were out there. You found a vendor that said that they could do what you needed. Were you tracking all of this and comparing MDMs? Did you ever find an MDM that could do that? No. Okay. So that's an opportunity to loop back to the people who approved your needs assessment to inform them that you've done the appropriate research and you found that that need can't be met by MDM. And that might be a time to go out and look for outside options, right? Other tools, software, hardware.
The engineering says, oh yeah, we're going to have that in 3 months.
Yeah, well, right. So we can't necessarily plan for what might be coming, but yeah, so that is a good opportunity to look for what we're talking about in this slide. Maybe there will be something that is available in hardware or software that can extend the functionality of your MDM to give you the features that you might need. This example that I've got right here comes from a large school district that wanted to be able to track when devices went into and out of specific types of classrooms so that the app load could change whenever they went from one type of class to another. And you can accomplish that using iBeacons, and there are custom apps that can be built to give even further functionality, and there's companies out there that specialize in doing this.
The answer I got was, well, you can script it. Like, well, yeah. But
Sure.
I was looking for an MDM, so I wouldn't have to script it.
Right, right. And that's on Macs, and that's after hours, and that's, yeah. So there are some interesting design requirements there that wouldn't necessarily be benefit from iBeacons for sure, but there are definitely options out there for you. Did you ever resolve the problem?
No, I'm continuing to do it manually.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Good luck with that.
It's only 20 computers, so.
Okay, well, and that goes back to the needs assessment thing and the scale deal, right? Is it easier to just solve the problem, even though it does require some manual work, than it might be to be super, super clever and engineer an automated solution that is supposed to do it for you, but then fails so often that you're ending up doing more work than you were doing in the first place, right? That being said, don't give up too easily. Just because MDM is the MDM project doesn't mean you can't necessarily solve other problems by employing other solutions. This iBeacon and custom app thing, there's a company called Two Canoes that does really interesting solutions with iBeacons and custom app writing to solve problems like this. There are folks out there that can help you. Okay, so you've been at this for days, weeks maybe even. You've been mapping needs to known payloads and coming up with a really, really deep matrix of your needs, capabilities, and weights. Once you've got what you feel like is a complete list, and this is really on you, this isn't you taking this back to management, because at this point you've already got their buy-off on the needs, you're just mapping to features. And so, you know, and the features are all available from Apple and from the developer's website. You know what APIs they've got out there, what payloads are possible. So once you've identified what's possible, you're going to write all of that into an RFP, okay? You're not writing up the needs, that part was done before. Now you're just writing up the product features that your final candidate products have to support, okay? And you're going to start building a short list of MDM products that you believe will meet your needs, kind of like what you did with the one that said that they could do what you wanted. You're going to do this by doing the obvious things. You're going to search vendor websites. You're going to ask your colleagues, your community, hey, have you been able to do this with your vendor? Who do you use? Who do you like to do this? You're going to want to come up with a list of at least 3 competing products so that you're really giving yourself at least a minimal breadth of exposure to competitors. But you probably don't want to go with more than 5 because going with more than 5 options is going to get onerous. It's going to get a little hard for you to keep track of. You may not have the staffing or the equipment to even pull that off. Okay? Once you've got that, though, you can move on to the prototyping phase of the project. All right? So, prototyping. It's playing in the sandbox, right? This is where you get to really have some fun. You contact each of the MDM vendors on your list, and you're going to request a trial of their solution. You're going to get all the MDMs on your list set up. Everything's going to be ready to go. You're going to ask your vendors for help like you did, and ask for their engineers, their pre-sales engineers to help you to get things set up. You're going to find that they're more eager at this stage to help you because you haven't yet given them money. So this is a great time to get them to show you the ropes on stuff. But while they're doing this, even though you're probably going to get the best response you'll ever get during the pre-sales process, it's still worthwhile to keep track of the quality of help and the response time you get from them, because that's something else you should really be tracking. Because once you've deployed this thing, you're going to have to live with it, and when things go wrong, you're going to need to call for help, and these are basically the same people you're going to be calling for help later on. Okay? Or not if they can't do what you want them to do.
I've been in pre-sales where I got great support, and the moment I paid,
Well, yeah, that's what so she's saying, pre-sale support is typically very, very good, and then once you've bought the product, they're like, thank you, we have your money, moving on. Yeah, and this is another great opportunity to use the community at large. We've all had experience with just about every MDM vendor there is out there, and everybody's got an opinion. So you can actually, measure and track that. Keep track of who you've talked to, what their opinions were. This last bullet point, I think, is really something I don't know, I've never heard anybody talk about this before, but this bugs me. We've talked about, I think at this show, I've heard two predominant things talked about: security and mobile device management. Like, it's been everywhere, right? Security is really complicated, and it's going to be one of those things that people are going to be talking about for a long, long time. I think MDM is kind of like a close second on that. And I think that's partially because every company out there is pushing together all of the stuff they don't know how to solve into, well, MDM will fix that. We'll figure out a way to shove that all together there. That makes it really complicated, right? And not every company that deploys an MDM solution does so in an easy-to-use way. So this last thing is, if your MDM is so complicated that you can't get it to work without a ton of help, you might want to be tracking that. It would not hurt if we pushed the industry to make the administrative process easier on us by buying the stuff that's easier to administer. Capitalism. So, speaking of which, you're going to need to establish a new matrix. This is going to be based on your architecture and your needs assessment, and in this case, you're going to track each product tested by ease of administration, stability, quality of the end user experience, and of course, meeting the architecture requirements. Anything else that you guys would think should be put in this list? This was like a obvious, very, very important things list, but there may be others that just like jump right into your head.
security, 2FA.
Excellent. She said security for the video. Cost and support options? Or cost of support options? Both. All of the above. Anything else? Okay. So don't just track the yes and no. This should not be a spreadsheet with checkboxes. I mean, it can be, but you need to be able to weight stuff. You need to be able to measure the qualitative answers to the questions. It's not just enough that a product can do the thing you want it to do. How well does it do the thing you want it to do? In what time frame? Is it something where you click something and then you have to walk away for a day and come back and hope it's done? So which qualitative variables would you add? I mentioned two: ease of use and length of time to complete. That's quantitative, but still. Any others you can think of? Okay. So to get the prototyping running, you're going to be setting up a number of devices that are a good example set of devices that you intend to manage. So don't just set up one iPad and use it to test all of the different MDMs that you're trying to use and then expect that to be a decent representation of what your experience will be. If you're going to be managing Macs, set up Macs. If you're going to be managing Apple TVs, set up Apple TVs. And I would recommend, if you've got all of the resources that we talked about earlier, do all of this in parallel. Use Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager, depending upon what you're working within, to do the device assignment, and assign a set of devices to each of the MDM solutions that you're working with. Okay? You're also going to set up each MDM as available MDM servers within your Apple. Test end-to-end every single feature that you're tracking as a requirement. You need to know if it works, you need to know how well it works, you need to know if it works quicker with this thing than that thing. And by the way, working quicker isn't just timing, hit go, and then watch when it finishes. It can also be, how long did it take me to do the administrative stuff that's necessary in order to make that thing happen? How long did it take to get to click and go, right? Test app deployment across the board, all of them. Test how well they deploy apps to device groups. Test book deployment if you're going to plan on doing that. Probably aren't, but if you are, test it. Test enterprise app deployment if appropriate. If you guys are doing enterprise app development and you're going to be deploying your own enterprise apps, for goodness sake, test it with each of the solutions. And then time your tests. MDMs do not share all the same performance characteristics, but I want to also say, be fair. You know, if you're going to run your timing tests, do them all at the same time of day, do them all at roughly the same time. Your cloud-based MDMs are not going to necessarily all be able to communicate with your client systems as easily at 9 a.m. as they are at 12 p.m., as they are at 3 p.m., as they are at 6 p.m. You know, so be fair, be consistent, be scientific. And of course, document your results meticulously, getting back to the science of this all, right? None of this matters if we're not documenting everything. Okay, how am I doing on time? My clock is not working properly up here. 10:23. Okay, I'm going to need to speed up a little bit. Okay, so compile test data, review the testing data to look for obvious errors, and then if practical, if you see things where data is just completely out of whack and you're like, oh, you know what, whoever was taking the notes on this must have entered a 0 where they meant to put nothing or something, retest. Make sure your data is completely valid. And then you're going to write a detailed report on your findings, write a killer executive summary so that the people who aren't going to read a huge, long technical document are going to get that executive summary and they're going to get the point. You're going to list the problems the MDM solution is going to solve, how those solutions align with the values of your organization. I cannot overemphasize this. When you're developing your needs, this is something else you should be thinking about when you're doing your needs assessment. The needs that people are telling you they need, are those needs part of the actual needs of the organization, like they align with the mission statement, with the vision statement, with what the CEO keeps saying they want to do, or is it in alignment more with a counterculture of resentment or people feeling like you're being heavy-handed as an IT department or a consultant, or they don't want to be messed with? Like, those are not things you want to be even, you want to be dealing with them, but you don't want to be putting those into your needs assessment, right? So going to do a detailed report, you're going to deliver this report to the appropriate people, and you're going to get sign-off. And you're going to give them an honest appraisal of the likelihood of the success or failure of the MDM project if the purchase is approved and the deployment is executed. You want to communicate up front here. It's the success or the perception of the success of your work is what's at stake there. Because if you're blowing smoke all the way through this process and then everything fails, that's all on you. So be super honest. And you're going to make a choice. You're going to redefine what success looks like here. So even though you probably are going to have a hard time choosing between one or two solutions, because there's a lot of great MDMs out there, you are going to need to choose one. Don't go with like, oh, well, I'm going to do one over in this department and I'll do another one for this department because there's this other feature that really is awesome for them. Just choose one. Make your life possible. Juggling multiple solutions for different populations of devices is possible, but it's crazy making in the long term. So you have a recommendation in mind. So now you're going to gather the pricing on official training on the specific product that you want, and you're going to be sure to put that cost into the recommendation that you write to management. And make certain that the training cost is part of that package that gets presented for approval, because Training is going to be super important. I can't tell you how often I see people do an implementation, they do a lot of the needs assessment, they do all this stuff right, and they don't even think about getting certified in the MDM that they're going to be putting out until after they've deployed it and they realize they aren't getting the kind of response that they used to get from sales support. And now they're on their own and they're like, well, I didn't learn how to do all of these things somebody else was doing for me in the background whenever they were trying to sell it to me. So you want to make sure that your training is in place early. Okay, and once all of that's together, you're going to deliver your detailed recommendation report, which is the result of your prototyping process and your research on training costs. You're going to include those costs for any outside consulting fees, like we were talking about before, getting a good vendor, that may be helpful or necessary. Don't underestimate the power of a good consultant. Somebody who's already done a deployment like this for someone else can be super valuable. They're going to have already run into all of the problems that you're about to run into. They're going to have developed workarounds and plans. They'll be able to warn you about things that the vendor didn't warn you about before you run into them. It's a good idea. Right, so this last line is basically about presenting to as large an audience as possible, because you really want if you have a board that you can present to, or a tech committee, or a committee of leaders of various departments, the broader the group of people who understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you've chosen, why you've chosen the thing you've chosen, it'll help them to deal with the inevitable blowback that comes from employees that are like, what, my devices are being managed now? I don't understand this behavior. Why did we do this? There will be people you didn't get a chance to talk to during needs assessment. And if you've got buy-in from people across the organization, you're giving yourself a buffer that will help a lot with buy-in at every level. So, oh, this is actually a pretty good question. I really want to know this. No judgment. Raise of hands. Who's intimidated about talking to CFOs, CIOs, and CTOs? Anybody? It's okay, right? We got some scary people out there. They're executives. They're A-type personalities. They bluster a lot, right? Not too many hands. So that's good. Keep in mind that you are a resource for them, and that the only way that you're valuable to them is if you're communicating openly and freely. They may not be the type of personality that warmly receives that, but it doesn't mean you don't have to do it. It's kind of your job, it's your responsibility, so just got to get through it. All right, and then do it all over again, right? You're going to establish a refresh cycle. So you're going to go into your deployment, and you're going to realize that you're going to need to revisit all of this in 2, maybe 3 years, because what's going to change? Well, we will have gone through 3 major operating system updates by then, right? Across multiple platforms. What's possible with MDM will be completely different. The MDM vendors will have gone through revisions on their stuff. Your organization will have grown or shrunk. Leadership may be the same, or leadership may have changed. Heck, you might be gone, right? you may have been replaced and maybe off on another job, right? There's things, a lot of stuff changes over time. So you want to establish as part of the deployment that, and set the expectations with management, that there will be a revisiting of this process, where you will be going back through and redeveloping a needs assessment and re-looking at what's available in the industry. And then documentation. Save your documentation, archive it, keep it organized, protect it. You're going to make sure that you document everything throughout the project. Don't forget, you're also going to document your training and your deployment process, right? Take great notes when you're going through your certification trainings, but also as you're actually doing the deployment, you're going to want to either take notes yourself on everything that you're doing, or you're going to want to have somebody with you who can take notes for you. Who sucks at taking notes on their own work, right? You're doing it. How are you supposed to do it and write about it with the other hand? It's like it's two different sides of your head. So, I mean, not every group can afford to have somebody who's just there for documentation purposes, but if you can convince somebody to pay for that body, that's a very valuable person because it ensures that you have fantastic documentation, and documentation is what you're going to go back to after everything is said and done to prove that you did the right thing at every step. And anything that you did wrong, also, if you screw up, you can go back to your documentation and you can see exactly where you screwed up and you can plan to do better next time. Nobody expects you to be perfect, right? Yeah, go ahead.
What really helps too is, especially during your prototyping, is set up a training matrix in the sense that you're documenting how to troubleshoot, say, when you're testing the MDM, not only from the vendor, but what actually works in the field, and also put that matrix into your documentation.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you. So I wanted to show you guys a couple of things. So first of all, even though this looks like it's the last slide of my deck, I've got another 10 or 12 slides. It's because the documentation is really important, and I sort of front-loaded it, and there's another thing that comes right after this. So I mentioned that you want to know how to find the payloads that are possible when you're doing your architecture part of the thing. So you're mapping your needs to an architecture. So this is a link to Apple's developer documentation on what you can do with configuration profiles. It lists all of them, right? So you can easily go to this in order to do that quick mapping, in order to find the features that you want to or need to put into that RFP. You'll get the slides later. The link is a hot link, so if the PDF works right, you should be able to just click on it. This is fantastic. So just in this past June, we've had another WWDC, as we do every June. This is what's new in device management for this year. So if you haven't seen this already, I highly recommend getting online and watching this. It's like an hour long, and it's super great. And then this, I don't know. I've used this in trainings before because I think it's a really well-written thing. Who either knows of or actually knows Sean Regan? Right? Yeah. Brilliant at documentation. Took the bull by the horns at Apple a long time ago, and this is some really good stuff. This is the this is the link to the profile manager help. You can actually get there by just going to help.apple.com/profile manager. You don't need the rest of it, but this was the link that I copied and pasted in. It gives you so everybody knows not to actually deploy profile manager, right? This is Apple's own guidance. We talk to your SEs, they say, yeah, this is great. It'll help us to show you what we can do, but to scale, go with any one of our trusted partner vendors, right? The reason why I like this is because it does show you, it gives you a little test bed area where you can play and you can learn. And if you're not quite to the point where you want to deploy something, this is sort of like Apple saying, well, this is how we would do it, right? They're obviously not in the business of MDM, but this is their stuff, and this is what we have to work with. So it's a great thing to look at. Who uses a project management tool in their day-to-day job right now? That number is way too low. Who runs anything that they would consider a project in their day-to-day job? Right? Half of you didn't put your hands up and you're all lying. You all run projects. Your whole life is a project. Getting dinner made can be a project, right? I mean, like there's Thanksgiving dinner is a project, right? Family dinners, oh my God. No, project management tools are incredibly useful things. They help you to do things like tracking risks and mitigating them, tracking dependencies within your project. Task dependencies are a huge thing that can fly under the radar if you don't have a tool that really makes them prominently obvious. So, I'm not going to make a recommendation for one in particular, but this is yet another thing. And you could actually use the process that we've been talking about for this hour, to find a project management tool, right? Identify your needs, identify the architecture, prototype it with different tools, see how they work for you. If you have the luxury of time and you can make a project out of finding good project management software, that would not be a bad choice. But get a system in place for project management and get all your risk factors listed out and watch them like a hawk and manage those task dependencies for sure. Okay, so we did a case study on Tuesday in the pre-conference workshop. I had a lovely group of people, many of whom I see here today, who worked with me on an IT security workshop. And we really took it as a workshop in the traditional sense where we all worked together collaboratively to get stuff done. And in the first half of the day, we went through a whole bunch of stuff where we talked about some things that I alluded to earlier in this talk, like figuring out what the values are that guide the organization you're working for so that when you're developing solutions, those solutions align with the values of the organization you're working for. For example, if you're working for an organization that highly values collaboration, right, because they're a creative organization and it's part and parcel to everything they do, and you deploy a solution without talking to anybody that shuts down collaboration, you're going to have a whole lot of very upset users, and for good reason. You have just killed their creativity. So you need to be aware of what guides the principle, what the guiding principles are that make these businesses work, these organizations function, and you need to play to them. You need to enable them and help them. So we did that together. Their names are listed here because I love them all. And we are sharing a PDF of 3 case studies that we explored during that pre-conference workshop. We talked about what you would do. We set some hypothetical design requirements for 3 sample organizations. We went with a school, a small private school, emphasis on the private because as we talked about, that has an impact. A retail store and an enterprise class business. And I had come up with a few things that were just sort of examples of features that each of those types of organizations would uniquely need. Anyway, this link to this Google Drive folder contains a PDF of what we ended up with. Everybody typed into it collaboratively, a la Subetha Edit for anybody who remembers those old days of getting together and typing into notes collaboratively. We did that in Google Drive. And the resulting document is available for you to peruse. I'll leave it up for as long as Google exists. How's that sound? I can't promise that, but that's the idea. If it ever has to go down, I'll give it to Neil, and we'll find a way to make it live somewhere else. But I would love for you guys to all take a chance to look at this document and look at the way we sort of called out some of the things that were maybe necessary because of the type of organization that we were talking about, and then the various payloads that we were interested in deploying as a result. Okay, so that one's there, and that is where we are. So do we have any questions or any thoughts?
Sure, no questions for this guy. Oh, of course, all the way in the back. I just came from there.
Just on the buy-in case with C-level executives, if you can get your Apple team involved just to tell your C-level people that you need an MDM, that helps a lot. It doesn't then matter which one you choose, at least they know you have to have one.
Okay, I love the idea of pulling in an outside authority figure to support and maybe lend credibility to your own voice within an organization. That's what I hear you saying. I love that idea. I really do. So what I would add to that would be, if you're going to bring the Apple employee in, you probably want to bring them in to meet with you in a lengthy way before that in order to talk with the Apple employee about your organization's values, how MDM aligns with those values, which features to talk about when they're in that meeting. Because I find that the Apple badge gives the authority to get in the door. Apple gets in the door everywhere because of that badge, right? And they get some respect depending upon the religious propensity of the person they talk to. If they're a Windows person that's just adamantly against Mac, maybe it goes the other way, right? But they will give a generic argument in favor of MDM if you don't help them to understand the personality of the person they're about to interact with. And so you can help to seed that field before they go into it. And that
I would also say what your objectives are too.
Well, absolutely, but those objectives, so your objectives as the IT person, right, if you're doing this the way that we're talking about, will be guided by the needs of the organization. You will have noticed problems in workflows, problems in security, problems in whatever it happens to be that you're trying to solve in your particular type of organization. You will have identified reasons to have MDM, right? And Apple can give some credibility to your argument that you need to solve those problems. But they really should be taking your advice based on the fact that you got that information from the organization at the ground level. Like, I'm seeing stuff not working right in our organization. This tool fixes this. We need to deploy this for that reason. And you can tie it to a financial argument, like this is going to save us money, this is going to make us money. You can tie it to other things like employee happiness, right? People are pissed off because this is an annoying process right now, and I need to deploy this because it's going to make it less annoying. These are all options, right?
Any other questions? Great. We are on break until 11. We'll see you back soon. A big hand for Sean, please.
Thanks, everybody.